JavaScript gives us the ability to do those types of things, right? We can manipulate the data on the fly inside of JavaScript itself rather than having to do anything in a script. If we need our data formatted a specific way for a table, we can handle it inside of the JavaScript instead of waiting for FileMaker to perform some kind of calculation. So we've got to get both sides of the coin there.
Well, all that being said, it's time for the DevCast. Everybody, welcome to another episode. Today we're going to talk about using JavaScript in your FileMaker solution. I'm going to just start with John to give us a little background, a little idea of why we thought this was a good topic for today. John?
Thanks. Well, the way this DevCast has evolved and the way our work as a company has evolved is in the last several years, it's actually more than the last several years, but we do an awful lot of external integration style work, and I think we talk a lot about API integration, integrating FileMaker with REST APIs, and I think integrating JavaScript solutions into FileMaker is another leg of that stool, with possibly third-party plugins being a third leg of tools we use in FileMaker to solve problems that FileMaker doesn't let us solve natively. We can do some really amazing things with JavaScript plugins that really let us say yes to clients in cases where we sometimes may have to say no. I think the AIS application, Dan, that we've worked on with you is a good example. That's not something that we could do natively in FileMaker, but with the tools that we can use with things like JavaScript, we can create an effective solution using FileMaker's front-end tools, user interface tools, really well, and still accomplish things that we otherwise couldn't accomplish just native FileMaker scripting. So we use it all the time and love it. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Well, that's great. Well, maybe we'll jump over to Jacob, since Jacob, you were the architect of the AIS solution that John was talking about. Can you give us an example of how you use JavaScript to solve some of those problems?
Oh yeah, I mean there's a handful of things you can do with JavaScript. I mean, building data visualization, dominant manipulation. I mean, the list goes on and on. JavaScript is, in my opinion, a super powerful scripting language for, any web-based project, whether we're integrating like data tables into a solution, the speed at which you can process data is just astounding. And it's super easy. I mean, the resources available on the internet, are very wide because JavaScript is such a highly adopted language. So you can, just find about anything you need to know on JavaScript. And then Zan's favorite tool, ChatGPT, to teach you the rest,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, not only is there's so much documentation everybody has gone through, like you run into a pain point and you're trying to figure something out. Somebody else, because it's been used for so long and is so it's used everywhere, somebody else is generally run into the exact same problem you're trying to solve and documented it usually. And then, like you said, if not, then there's also now the AI tools to help code it without having to actually write any code. So
could I use it for my record transfer puzzle?
In terms of like its relationship with FileMaker, maybe. It depends on how you're transcoding the data. I say maybe because the JSON is supported, right? So I guess if your data can be formatted to JSON, potentially yes. We're doing something similar for the AIS app, right? We're using an external application node process that has no bearings with FileMaker, and FileMaker is just reading data that generates.
And that's millions of records, right? I'm talking about thousands of records, but you're pulling in millions of records.
Yeah. Yeah, millions. Every second.
Every second. So I don't know. So there's a thought, huh? Okay. How about you, Russell? Can you give us an example of how you use JavaScript to solve problems?
Yeah, I mean, kind of bouncing off what they've said, it's definitely, it's almost became like a no-brainer to kind of integrate it within FileMaker. And I read an article earlier that was saying that it was the top used programming language, and it's also with the top frameworks. It's also, like jQuery and Angular and React, those all use JavaScript. So it's kind of, been a no-brainer to sort of use JavaScript nowadays within FileMaker. One of the add-ons that I've dived into is with pivot tables. So being able to see your data in a pivotal way to kind of change the horizontal and vertical fields that you're viewing your data on, and be able to kind of get a better visualization out of it instead of just the standard kind of FileMaker data table layout. With pivot tables, you can see it in a much more visual way and have better summary selection and a much more kind of intuitive way to look at your data. And so, I think, Zandon, you might be doing a bit of a pivot table demo today. It's definitely a powerful tool that is worth diving into within FileMaker. It's a good topic for today, definitely.
Yeah.
In today's development world.
So, Joe?
Yeah, I got a little demo here whenever we're ready.
Okay, well, let's talk to Joe for a second. Joe, what do you have to add?
Excited about that demo, aren't you?
No.
I'm actually really excited about my demo too, because it's there's JavaScript is kind of one of those things that you don't really, as a FileMaker developer, you don't really think about. Before I was into the FileMaker environment, I was doing some things in Python and doing things in Ruby, and one of the advantages about being in multiple environments is you got to pull in small resources as needed for whatever project. And so I, in a way, have been implementing JavaScript solutions for a really long time, but they're just tiny little functions like an on-screen timer or a simple sliding out, window, or just little things that can, add just enough enhancement to a solution to make it a little bit nicer or cleaner, or flow a little bit better, or just add some functionality that you can do natively in FileMaker. And I think that's where a lot of hang-up is, that we often think that JavaScript is this really large code base to have to implement into a solution, but in reality, all we really need is small little bits of functionality. And everything from small, like I said, a timer or just a way to display an image, to something like a data table where you're processing thousands of records pretty quickly. And we've got a number of demos that we can show you just a little bit of how we're all using it. But Zandon, if you want to start off with your demo, we can kind of move on from there.
That sounds great.
Oh, yeah.
Away, Zandon.
Super fast. Let's see here. So this is a pivot table for those who haven't seen a pivot table before. And this is just a JavaScript library that's being used. This is a solution we actually created, long time ago. And you can easily use it with another tool called Carafe, which is a FileMaker tool for loading JavaScript libraries and interacting with them. But with the pivot table, you can see we can drag and drop different data fields and associate them into a pivot table or a crosstab table. So I can pull my gender down for my left side, and you can see from my data set that I've got 278 female, I pull down the names, like you can see the names across, or we can put the names down to the side, but you can easily manipulate and work with the data table, or I'm not the data table, but the pivot table. And you've got summary totals at the right-hand side, at the bottom side, but this library is really nice and complete. You can quickly do other things that are also super easy because it's embedded with a whole bunch of other libraries. You can, once you've displayed it in a pivot table, you can convert it over into different display types where you can have it in a bar chart. You can have it in all sorts of different types of charts, as well as percentage charts and so on and so forth. So there's some fun things that you can do with it, and it's a pretty easy one to load, especially if you're using Carafe. So that's pivot table if you haven't seen pivot table before, but super duper handy.
How are you getting this? Is this a library you have to install in FileMaker?
Yeah, so Carafe Kitchen, Carafe is a great little file that you can download, and it's got walkthroughs, and it's got all sorts of different JavaScript modules that are written to work with FileMaker in order to deploy these into your solution. And it basically involves copying over, creating a web viewer on your layout and titling it a specific name, object name, and then pulling a script in that'll pull the data in. So yeah, so here's Carafe Kitchen. You can see they've got Google Maps, they've got data tables to display. Really straightforward for loading these in. And the example data, like you can see, this is showing it where you can pass a parameter from the web viewer back to FileMaker. So I'm getting back my script parameter of 57, which is the ID for that tag. And data tables, which is super nice for being able to send lists and all sorts of different features that data table provides for quickly listing portals and selecting different items and summarizing. That's Carafe Kitchen. That's pretty sweet. It's super friendly, super easy to use, and just go through the documentation. Whether you're using the FileMaker add-on version to just quickly load them in, or you're copying the script over, or you're using the more complicated one where you can fully edit the actual library interaction, generate the scripts for it manually, it's pretty awesome. It's super friendly. There's all sorts of different features, charting. These are all just JavaScript, right? So it's giving you this flexibility to make it easy to load JavaScript libraries to do different things into your solution.
Well, that is just amazing. I'm looking at the quick start guide on the web page right now. I can see that I'm going to have to nerd out on this a little bit.
You can the Carafe approach lets make it a little easier for FileMaker developers to integrate an open source JavaScript library into their solution. But even if it's not available as a Carafe module, you can still integrate an open source JavaScript library into your solution and accomplish whatever it is you need to accomplish.
Who wants to go into Zandon? Who do you think should talk next?
One of the things I like about JavaScript in general and FileMaker is because of how fast it is able to handle JSON data in general. FileMaker does a pretty good job of it, but tends to slow down the larger the data set is. So as you notice when Zandon was doing his demo, pivot table data loads pretty quickly once you already have the values loaded into a JSON object or into a JSON just glob basically from FileMaker. You can do anything you want with that, and it's pretty lightning fast. And so just as a test, I haven't really spent time really pushing to see which the differences between FileMaker parsing JSON and JavaScript. But I built this demo, and I'm actually quite surprised at the results. Okay, so this is just a demo that I built based on our Portage Bay demo that we put out in a lot of our blog posts. As a quick selling point, this small nav on the side of this window, that's the JSON function to just load and unload, basically show and hide links to different layouts in the FileMaker solution. So it's calling a script passing in basically a layout that it needs to go to, and performing the navigation. So even just this small little thing is a little tiny JavaScript library, but that's my favorite way to use JavaScript. These JSON objects that are built or that is being read are pretty. I did a whole test from 100 records. We would think is 100 records all the way up to 100,000. And one of the things I found interesting was how a JSON-based virtual list in FileMaker, how it responds to larger records versus how the standard Carafe data table loads JSON records. So if you're familiar with virtual lists, this isn't anything new. Basically just creating a virtual list table with a number of calculated fields that parse out a JSON variable. So pretty standard functionality. So there's loading 100 records. This is all, pretty standard stuff. The data I'm using is from just an online tool to build JSON text files. So it's pretty simple, and they're both the exact files between both the JavaScript and FileMaker versions. So this is the FileMaker version loading 100 records, FileMaker version loading 1,000 records, and on my end, I'm getting a spinning ball, and then it does load. And that's not horribly slow, but where I really notice the latency is when I'm scrolling through these records. FileMaker is having to recalculate the values for each row as I'm scrolling through the data. And that's where I really start to notice a latency. I could do 10,000 records, but for the sake of the time, we don't need to wait a good, 5-6 minutes for that to fully load. And when I did 100,000 records at FileMaker, it just crashed. So, and that's mainly, I would say, it's probably like caching issue with like my local RAM. Although I've got a pretty good amount of RAM, so I would be surprised that. I was surprised that it crashed. So let's switch over to the data tables, and this is a standard data table from the Carafe. No changes to it other than column names. Very, very straightforward. I just dragged on the Carafe add-on, and then set up the column names for the display, and that's it. Right off the bat, adds some functionality that the FileMaker version does not have. So that's nice. And then it's also pretty easy to add additional functions in the scripting. So immediately between the two, I notice I've got more functionality versus having to build out each one of those additional functions in FileMaker if we were to add it to the layout. That's 100 records, pretty quick. 1,000 records, also very quick. No latency when I'm scrolling. I've got immediate response, for all that data. Even 10,000 records, I had a spin ball for what? Not even and it's gone. There it is. For not even a half a second. But there we go. It just goes to show how fast JavaScript can load large JSON. And when you're having to deal with lots of records in FileMaker, it's just not a response time that you can always wait for. So big reason to use something like this in your solution. You're going to spend less time getting it set up. You will spend some time figuring out what you need to do once you have the interface ready. You're going to have to do that in FileMaker as well. So right off the bat, you've got more functionality and then more tools available just by switching to this model or using JavaScript.
Oh, I was going to say it looked like the window was just slightly undersized, and so you're losing the header.
Was I losing part of the header?
Just when you were showing the record, no, it was just, I think the FileMaker window was a little small, so the web viewer window was rolling up and down as you were scrolling, just a little bit. So the header
weird
disappeared in the web viewer, but it's okay.
Oh, weird.
Just visibly, normally when if you're inside the frame and you're scrolling, it's the header stays at the top, and you can select sort and so on and so forth, right? Or you can also set it to paging, so you don't have to do a continuous scroll. And then
I see what you're saying. The top.
Yeah, depending on how many records you try to show. Yeah, that's a good option. Paging.
Well,
Yeah. And how long does it take for the 100,000?
Not that long, but long enough that I don't know if we want to do that during the during the day.
Yeah, and there's some ways to still speed that up as well, right? That's a
yes
JSON loading parsing issue. And you can actually, if you get a little more complicated, you can optimize it. I've done millions of records up until you hit the character limit for a specific field in FileMaker. And if the web viewer is written to reference the field and you have the JavaScript in the field, then you can actually use millions and millions of JSON records, and they'll load really fast, even on mobile. So it's pretty incredible when you're not trying to manually go through and collect the JSON and load it in a variable. If you're using it as a field, a text field that's storing the JSON, that text field is just a really fast load. And yeah, you can do millions and millions of records, and then the data tables it's gonna be very responsive too. So we did some tests with that initially with the data tables, where I loaded up, well, let's try 5 million, and pretty soon you hit the character limit for the field in FileMaker. And so I got around that by using multiple fields and then just daisy chaining them together in the calculation for the web viewer. So some strategies that you can do to really cache. Basically, it's caching all of that JSON data, so you're not having to go through and pull records from FileMaker.
Apparently, I need to.
Yeah, so I will say that it does add some new ways to look at data and how you're managing the data. So there is a little bit of data separation in a sense that needs to happen when you're starting to implement larger data sets. But it's still within JavaScript, and you're still doing something that you couldn't really natively do in FileMaker. It adds a ton of functionality, and it's pretty fast to set up.
Once you have that JSON object, you can use it as a calculation engine. So you can use your JavaScript as a calculation engine to do anything based on that JSON object data. So once you have that data loaded, you say it was 1 million records, you can do a summary. You can do all types of, scripting in JavaScript is very similar to scripting in FileMaker, where you can just loop through the set and say, well, give me a summary of this from the JSON object, or give me all of the instances that match this criteria, and so on and so forth. And FileMaker can be really slow trying to do any type of summary in that fashion. But once you've got it loaded into a JSON object, regardless of how big that JSON object is, to a certain degree, it's really super fast for running calculations against it. So just like FileMaker users, we use the calculation engine on different fields and different things with show and hide. You can use the JSON from a web viewer to run calculations against data. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then you have access to the full world of JavaScript developers for functions. So if you need a function that doesn't exist in the FileMaker world, you've got a huge party of developers out there. So if you needed a function to return, like let's say you needed to write a check, you needed to get the number as text, there's a JavaScript function out there for that. So if the common library FileMaker functions doesn't have what you want, there's almost certain. Yeah,
or more advanced, using like a library to parse AAS raw data feeds and format it in a human readable format.
That's a big one, right? Any sort of sensor data that you're getting a live feed from.
There's nothing better than finding that somebody else has done the work for you. I mean, that's gold.
Does anybody have anything else they want to say about JavaScript?
You want me to start the
Yeah,
timeline?
go ahead. Go ahead, buddy.
Okay.
Yeah, let's take a look at the timeline. That sounds awesome.
So for this example, it's gonna be a little bit different because I'm just showing code base. I don't know. Can you guys see this?
Yep.
You're able to see okay, so this is VS Code, kind of going in a different approach than using Carafe. Carafe is great for the things that it has, and sometimes you come across the case or use case where you're trying to build something custom, or maybe there's a resource that JavaScript has that hasn't been built in the Carafe manner. And in those cases, you're kind of going back to the drawing board. This is looking at JavaScript, kind of the structure we would create, or Carafe already kind of creates behind the scenes. In this case, we're leveraging what's known as Google's timeline chart. So I'm just spinning up a live server, and this is just an example of the timeline it would create. So we can see, like, this is just straight out of the box for Google. All this functionality that Google's already built in, even formats and styles. And you can see like how this could be applied for a potential client. But it's real simple. This is kind of giving you an idea of like data structure, how you would build the JSON object within FileMaker. And in this case, there's some interesting things that you have to do to prep data ahead of time. JavaScript gives us all the ability to do those things. I created this as like a template, right? This is something that renders just fine in the web space in its default form from Google. Going in the same manner as Carafe kind of replaces items so that we can do that in a script on the fly. So the challenge of taking this working JavaScript rendered timeline and formatting it in a Carafe manner to support the same context, but from FileMaker. You can see there's a few things you have to do, but JavaScript gives us the ability to do those types of things, right? We can manipulate the data on the fly inside of JavaScript itself rather than having to do anything in a script. If we need our data formatted a specific way for a table, we can handle it inside of the JavaScript instead of waiting for FileMaker to perform some kind of calculation. So we gotta get both sides of the coin there. But yeah, this is pretty much it. This is just a simple example, and VS Code obviously super great resource for building more of a custom approach for JavaScript module.
Okay, we have a moment of silence. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, that was pretty awesome, Jacob.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Jacob, were you defining like the styling directly in that JavaScript code, but like with FileMaker styles?
Yeah. So the library itself like supports a bunch of different options, right, for it, and you're kind of under the constraint of Google's library or Google's chart in this case. But that doesn't mean that Google hasn't already built like the world for you. It supports more than you would think. And then if it doesn't support the thing you need, I mean, you're already in JavaScript, so you might as well just build it, right? But yeah, I made it so that the inputs that Google was accepting, you could input from FileMaker's side. That way, you didn't have to. You just import the script with the JavaScript or HTML structure the way it's supposed to be, and the same kind of graph model replacing elements with things that you defined inside of FileMaker. It's the same process.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and if you feel skittish at all about working with JavaScript, like using ChatGPT or one of the other machine learning models that allow for large tokens, you can literally take your JavaScript file and put it in the code editor and say, can you help me make the headers bold? And it'll tell you exactly where to change it and yada, yada. And you can say, can you add a column for this? And it would give you the code for that. So the difficulty level has gotten so much easier if you're good at coding and you want to do it yourself. But if you're like, well, I just need to do this to this, you can give it this and say, this is what I need to do, and it'll do it for you. And it takes all the difficulty out of it.
Yeah. It's a brave new world.
Definitely is.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, so it sounds like we've covered it. Anybody have anything they want to say before we wrap up this episode?
Go use JavaScript.
No, but there's JavaScript already. You should be in your FileMaker solution, and just try doing something simple like writing a manual JavaScript function and, play with it. It's pretty straightforward. It's really fun, and it's really easy.
It's really fun, and it's really easy. I've downloaded the Carafe Kitchen that you recommended. I'm going to take a look at that, and we'll see. Maybe there's a solution in here somewhere for dealing with my large data set. It's not 1 million records, but it's 5,000 records.
Could be.
Yeah, well, when you get to a point where you need to load that, it's just some caching techniques that they're pretty basic. They're a little hard, I think, for some people to wrap their head around as to how you would do it, but it's an easy one to help you with, to learn how to cache your JSON so that you're not having to wait for loading the JSON. You do it almost the same as you would do it for a web page.
All right, guys, thanks so much. That ends this
Thank
episode
you.
of the DevCast.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Get back to work.
All right.
Thank you.
Go learn JavaScript.
Go learn JavaScript.
Thank you for spending your time with us at the FileMaker DevCast today. We hope you found something useful, something thought-provoking, and something to take into your own development approach. Things that help you to be more productive and to allow you and your team to get more done in less time. Find us online at portagebay.com and filemakerdevcast.com, and also on social media at FM DevCast and Portage Bay. Let us know if we can help you or your company with modernizing your approaches and streamlining your workflow. We look forward to seeing you at the next DevCast.